Hey everyone, it's Bishop Barron. I'm outside the Paul VI audience hall. Just came out of my first session of the Synod, and it was kind of fascinating. The Pope spoke to us in general terms about the Synod. Then we had the Secretary General of the Synod and the Relator General speak to us, just kind of laying out the Instrumentum Laboris and some of the major themes we'll be covering. It was all in Italian, but they gave us the speeches, so I was able to sort of follow along. I can read it fairly easily. The funny moment, though, was there was an election for this commission. I guess it's a new thing on information, and it was done by regions. And so I suddenly found myself there's the voting for America, and my name was in there among many others. And so they voted, and I ended up tied with Cardinal Lacroix of Quebec. And then everyone laughed because they said, in case of a tie, it goes to the older candidate. So this was the youth synod, but the older candidate got the vote. I'm actually very happy not to have been elected. So anyway, it was an interesting opening session. And then off we go. It's really a month now of this kind of work. So keep praying for us, keep following us, and God bless you.
Well, welcome back to the Word on Fire show. I'm Jared Zimmer, the host for this episode. Brandon is out this week, and so I took the privilege of getting to sit here with Bishop Barron on the Word on Fire show. As I mentioned, my name is Jared Zimmer. I'm the director of the Word on Fire Institute. And Bishop, as always, it's great to be with you again.
Hey, Jared. Always good to see you and talk to you. How are things in Texas?
Doing well. It's already getting hot, of course. Good
Yeah.
Texas weather out here, but doing really well.
And how are the kids? Little Fulton's okay?
He's doing good. Yeah, they're now on summer vacation and going crazy, so it's good.
Good. Okay, good.
Yeah, so I know you actually have several things coming up. I know you've got an ordination coming up, and you also just spent some time with some Franciscans.
I did. That was a couple days ago. All the Franciscan families have their novitiates out here in my region, really, in Southern California. And I met with them, so the Capuchins and the conventuals and the OFMs. And we had a wonderful day together talking about evangelization, the intellectual life, and all kinds of stuff. So that was fun. As we record these words, tomorrow is our priesthood ordination here in LA. And I have the privilege of vesting one of the guys who's from my region. Wonderful young man. He's been out here for dinner a few times. I've gotten to know him. So always looking forward to that. Then the next week, I've got to head back to Baltimore to the USCCB meeting. So never a dull moment,
It does seem very constant. Well, in that constancy, what are you reading these days? I always love to ask you that question.
Oh, yeah. Well, one thing I'm listening to, I spend so much time in the car. I listen to these novels. I'm listening to A Tale of Two Cities, Dickens' great novel, which, I think I might have read it or read part of it many, many years ago. But it's basically all new to me as I listen to it. But I really like listening to these novels. I just finished, The Brothers Karamazov a couple of weeks ago. 39 hours of listening.
It's a feat, yeah.
I'm still reading that long Churchill biography. It's about 1,000 pages. Started it a long time ago. I read it a little bit at a time, But I'm also reading, I'm finishing up Camille Paglia's collection of essays. And she's someone that I've always enjoyed reading. I don't agree with her all the time, but she's always provocative and interesting. And let's see what else. Oh, I just got a wonderful book on Thomas Aquinas and the Greek Fathers. It was based on a symposium a little while ago. People like Matt Levering and Joseph Warwickoff from Notre Dame and many others contributed. So it's kind of a high-level academic study, but in my area of Aquinas, but especially Aquinas and the Fathers, I always find interesting because it's an overlooked part of Thomas. Yeah. Anyway, those are a few things I'm reading.
Yeah, interesting. Well, today I wanted to kind of touch on something that in a recent interview that you had with Ben Shapiro, at one point I just loved the way you said it and the way you explained it. And I thought maybe we'd dive a little bit deeper, but this idea that you'd like to re-Judaize Catholicism. And it seems to me that there are kind of two aspects to this. And first is, of course, the reading of Christ. But then second, also some of the kind of practical aspects to this. So first, why is viewing Christ in light of Israel so important?
It's hugely important. And, this is a very old problem, Jared, within Christianity, a temptation in the direction of de-Judaizing. So it goes back to the 2nd century. And Marcion, one of the earliest heresies the church fought was Marcionism, which wanted to drive a wedge between the two testaments, Old and New. In fact, even within the New Testament, Marcion wanted to get rid of those books that had a more Jewish kind of overtone. That view haunts Christianity up and down the centuries. Most recently, now go into the 19th century and well into the 20th century, you've got a strong Marcionite tendency. Look in someone like Rudolf Bultmann, who was hugely influential. Even, heck, when I was studying Bible in the 1970s and 80s, Bultmann was still an influence. Bultmann is unselfconsciously a Marcionite. I mean, holds to a de-Judaized approach. Whenever you say that, the New Testament is much more Hellenistic, it's much more Greek, it represents a different philosophical perspective, we moved away from all this Jewish business. A form it takes today, by the way, which I see almost every day on the internet, is, the Old Testament God is that bad old God of violence and hatred and, tribalism. Then there's this wonderful New Testament God that Jesus reveals. What you've done is you've effectively ripped Jesus out of his roots. You've ripped him out of the ground. And what happens, and you see it from Marcion to Bultmann and to people like John Dominic Crossan, you see Jesus becoming now a bland spiritual teacher of timeless truths. So he's like the Buddha and like the Sufi mystics and like, Jewish rabbis and everybody else, like a New Age wisdom figure. But see, to do that is to do enormous violence to Jesus and to the New Testament. Because, what do we hear constantly in the New Testament authors? Is in their Greek, katagrapha, according to the writings. And they meant by that not the writings of Plato, or Philo. They meant the writings of what we call the Old Testament. They saw him, and of course, I like to refer to him as Rabbi Shaul sometimes, Paul, the apostle, Rabbi Saul, again and again will say some version of Jesus is the yes to all the promises that God made to Israel. How do you understand the resurrection? How do you understand the cross? How do you understand what we later call the incarnation? But precisely as that, as the yes to every promise God made to Israel. When you see Jesus now as the fulfillment of Israel, you really get what's good news about the gospel. That's the good news they wanted to share. It's also why Rabbi Shaul, the Apostle Paul, typically went first to synagogues, right? When he would come to Philippi or Athens or Corinth, his first move was the synagogue. Of course it was. Of course it was, because the sons of Israel would be the ones who would most readily get this message he was offering. Now, he also intuited this is meant for all the world, so Paul spoke to the Gentiles as well. But his first instinct was talk to the Jews. They'll get what I'm describing. I think that's very important, to recover that Jewish background if we're going to properly understand what the good news is.
Well, how do you strike that balance between, because it seems like the temptation to this kind of Marcionite perspective is to kind of hold him at a higher level almost, to remove him from that continuity. But then there's also the Judaizers of the first century that would try to inculcate a lot of Jewish law into Christianity and things like that. So it does seem that Catholicism in particular does strike that balance, but in a daily way or in a reading of the Gospels, reading of the Bible, how do we strike that balance?
Go back to the very first council, the Council of Jerusalem, and you're putting your finger on what the early church saw as its first major problem, its first major dilemma, affirming everything I've just been saying. So all the great figures, and Peter and James and John and Paul and the rest of them, they all saw what I was describing. Jesus, the fulfillment of Israel. But then, largely under the leadership of Paul, they saw that elements of the Jewish heritage legitimately are going to fall away. Yeah. Why? Because this new fulfillment has come in Jesus that has moved us beyond some of the particularities, let's say, of the dietary restrictions and the laws governing temple worship, etc. You see it, don't you, in St. Peter in the Acts of the Apostles, that story of the house of Cornelius, when he sees all the unclean animals coming down in that vision, and the voice saying, "Take and eat," and "Oh, no, I will never do that." But then what's being communicated there is the early church coming to realize what was really essential about the Jewish background fulfilled in Jesus and what could fall away. You see it, of course, massively in Paul. that we're justified not by works of the law. And Paul didn't mean by that now we bracket morality. I mean, that's the trouble with a simplistic reading of that. What he meant was, it seems to me, that elements of the juridical and ceremonial and dietary prescriptions of the Jewish law fall away because they found this new fulfillment in the sacrifice of the cross, for example, So you're right, there's a tension, and the church in its earliest phases dealt with that. Reread that little section in the Acts of the Apostles when they recount the findings of that first Council of Jerusalem, and that's what they did, They felt under the guidance of the Spirit that certain elements could fall away or be reinterpreted, while others, of course, remain massively in place, I would say, as the permanent interpretive framework for understanding Jesus. So, yeah, you might say the middle ground between a Marcionism on the one hand or a complete, Judaizing on the other hand, the church found that middle path, and that's how they went forward.
And in regard to reading the Bible, especially whenever we read the Old Testament, there's kind of reading it through the Jewish cultural lens. And it does seem that in even some of the modern exegesis that we can read, some people purely do it through a Jewish cultural lens, and some people remove that completely. So when we're talking about reading the Old Testament, how ought Catholics to be able to read that?
Well, again, that's the tension. That's always the problem. You got to find the right middle ground. A lot of the recent scholarship that I've enjoyed so much, the new perspective on Paul, people like E.P. Sanders and N.T. Wright and James D.G. Dunn and so many others. They like using initials, don't they? All the new perspective people, N.T. and D.G. But that's what they tried to do, is to re-Judaize, because they all came of age. The men I just mentioned would all be, 10, 20 years older than I am. So they would have come of age massively in the kind of Bultmann-inspired period. So I think they're trying to respond to that. But it's not to fall back into a complete, call it complete Judaizing. But Jesus, the fulfillment of Israel, that keeps Israel very much to the forefront. Everything Paul says in Romans 9-11 remains in place, that God does not go back on his covenant with Israel. Yeah. But this covenant has found a new fulfillment in Jesus. One that is in one way utterly unexpected. N.T. Wright's so good at articulating that. That the yes was indeed a great yes, but it was a very unexpected yes to the promises made to Israel. And the Christian dispensation is kind of in that space of the yes to Israel, but this very surprising yes. And to stay there, I think, is to get it right.
Now, in regard to particularly Catholic liturgy, I love whenever you're talking with Ben Shapiro about the temple language of the Old Testament and how we need a continuity with that. So how ought Catholics understand, particularly the Mass, in regard to this idea of the temple?
Yeah, and I've been very influenced by a lot of this temple research. Another initial, G.K. Beale is another scholar who's written a lot about the temple.
Another initials, yeah.
Yeah, more. I should be R.E. Barron, I suppose. But you can't get the Mass, Jared, apart from the temple. And again, that's not to, let's all go back to the temple worship, but it's to see this very deep continuity between the style and the structure of temple worship and the Mass. The very fact that we have priests, that we have bishops wearing mitres, that we have vestments, that we have candles and incense and altar and offerings. All of that is temple talk. Where do you see it, by the way? You see it in the letter to the Hebrews, massively, undoubtedly written by a temple priest. And you see it in the book of Revelation, undoubtedly written by someone who had deep association with the temple. The Mass, as we know it, comes up organically out of that interpretive framework. I often make that contrast, between the Catholic priest at the altar and a Protestant preacher in the pulpit. And the preacher will wear, very often, the doctoral robes. Mm-hmm. So the robes that he or she received upon getting a doctorate, doctor just means teacher, right? Because at the heart of Protestant worship is teaching. It's the proclaiming of the word, right? So it's the doctor, the teacher in the pulpit, who's the center of attention. But I mean, I could wear doctoral robes, but when I come out, to say Mass, I've got the robes of a temple priest on. And now as a bishop, I wear the mitre, which goes back to the temple. I wear the mitre of a temple high priest. I swing a censer, around the altar of sacrifice. And at the heart of the prayer, not to denigrate the homily for a second, there is in fact very important teaching. There's sort of doctoral work that goes on. But at the heart of it is a temple sacrifice. It's done at an altar by a priest. You won't get that until you get the temple. Yeah. But again, the difference is the way the temple worship has been transfigured and fulfilled in the great sacrifice of the cross, which of course the Mass represents, right? So the priest, acting in persona Christi, in the very person of Christ, represents the eternal sacrifice of Christ to his Father, drawing all those who are at the Mass into that great act of worship, and thereby bringing us online. See, and all of that you can hear in the Old Testament. When all the tribes go up to Mount Zion, they join together in right praise, they become properly aligned. What was anticipated there is fulfilled and beyond fulfilled by the cross of Jesus, which is now recapitulated and represented at every Mass, presided over by a temple priest. So that's the continuity, which is very deep and very rich, between Judaism and the Mass.
One thing that Russell Kirk often would say is that the American culture, the Western culture, received from the Judaic heritage this idea of a divine law, that there's something that is applicable to absolutely everyone, whether you're a ruler or a plebeian, it's everyone. And would you say that the Catholic Church also somewhat inherited that as well?
Yeah, sure. Different dimensions of Judaism. I've been stressing now the kind of sacrificial temple side of it. But sure, the moral law, and that's what Kirk is driving it. The moral law that transcends any political arrangement. And so all political actors are under that law. Right, it's a deeply biblical idea. And yeah, that's shaped the West remarkably, And that certainly exists within Catholicism, our strong sense of the moral law. So yeah, that reflects a Judaizing, a Judaic sort of principle.
Yeah, and to kind of get also just kind of practical, especially for people who are evangelists and maybe have a friend or relative that might be Jewish. The relationship between Christians and Jews has had kind of its ups and downs throughout history, to say the least. And so what advice might you have for those Catholics or just Christians who have a Jewish friend or desire to have a either closer relationship and guide that in evangelization?
Yeah, good. And I mean, obviously, always to reach out in love and always to reach out in an attitude of inclusivity and to overcome any anti-Semitic, prejudice. I hope it's clear from what we've been saying is that anti-Semitism it's inimical to Christianity, really authentically construed. As you suggest quite correctly, there's been a less than stellar record when it comes to Christians relating to Jews. So I mean, once that's in place, this very deep love and deep friendship, I think then some of these points of contact can be explored very fruitfully. I've often said to Jews who are becoming Catholics, and I've known a number over the years, and I'll say, you're so disposed to get what we're about. In a way, I'll say, I need to explain fewer things to you because a lot of what you're seeing is deeply Jewish. Good. Let's talk about those things, those points of contact. I've been involved in a lot of ecumenical and interreligious conversations over the years, and that's what I find talking to Jews is very fruitful. Now, I get, given our awful history, that for a lot of Jews, and I understand it, that whenever you talk about evangelization, fulfillment of Israel, they can hear oppression. They can hear, at the limit, genocide, And I understand that perfectly. So we must always be, dramatically sensitive to that fact. But I think deep friendship and then explore points of contact.
Yeah, it seems to me like St. Paul is kind of our model to go directly to the synagogues and speak in that temple language and the like.
Right. And Paul, who never repudiates his Judaism, Paul doesn't see himself as, converting from one religion to another. He saw himself as, I'm the spokesman for this wonderfully unexpected fulfillment of Israel. he's a proud son of Benjamin. I mean, and Paul doesn't repudiate his Jewish roots. Again, that's Romans 9-11. Is the covenant with Israel remains altogether valid? Of course it does, because it's been fulfilled in Jesus. So yeah, Paul would be the model.
Yeah. And one thing that I've thought about as well is that, the Judaic Christian heritage, right, and that they are truly our roots. And when you think about in a familial sense, psychology is showing more and more that when the family is broken and that removal of roots, there's a great kind of crisis in the mind of especially the children.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe there's something to that in regard to our relationship with the Jewish folks around us, and that there's kind of this familial relationship, and that truly we do share roots.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Jared, that it hurts both of us, I mean, John Paul II, who in so many ways was a son of Vatican II, and Vatican II represents a huge, moment of clarity on this score. But John Paul saw that in that wonderful visit he made in the early 80s or mid 80s to the Roman synagogue, and that set the tone for so much of the conversation to the present day. Good, because we're both hurt by a lack of real conversation.
Yeah. And would you say, too, that, I mean, with this rise in unbelief, I mean, I think it's affecting the Jewish faith just as much as it is the Christians, maybe a little bit less than ours. And I think community has a lot to do with that. But would you say that we kind of have somewhat of a common enemy in this rise of secularism, this rise of atheism, and that's another place of point of contact?
Absolutely. And I do that a lot in these ecumenical and interreligious conversations I'm having now. I'll say just that. That as we've been discussing our differences, our points of contact, let's remember, brothers and sisters, that we have a common enemy today, So the secularism that stands athwart any reference to the transcendent, to a moral absolute, to a sense of God, of a happiness beyond what the world can give, all of that, we have a common enemy. And so we should make a common ground. One thing I loved, getting back to N.T. Wright, another of our initial people, he has taken very seriously the inspiration from the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah is one of the first now to realize what was given to Israel is meant for the world. So those lyrical passages at the beginning of Isaiah, and then kind of reiterated in the middle part of like Isaiah 40s and 50s, about the universal implication of Israel. So all the tribes of Israel go up, but it's all the kings and tribes of the world are meant to go up, right? And that whole idea of the light to the nations and of bearing good news, those are all Isaiah themes. That's deep within the tradition of Israel, that somehow the God of Israel is meant for the world. Well, N.T. Wright says, mysteriously, that's exactly what happened through Christianity, is the God of Israel was indeed brought to the ends of the world. And then N.T. Wright quotes, what's his first name? The great rabbi for London, Rabbi Sachs, not Leonard. That's the doctor. Rabbi, I can't think of it now, but very influential figure, very important intellectual, and he agreed with that. Now, speaking as a Jew, as a rabbi, he said it's true that Christianity has brought the God of Israel to the nations, and so we Jews should have a gratitude, for that. I think that wonderful symbiosis between the two is worth celebrating.
Absolutely. And you've mentioned a few different authors. Are there any specific books in particular that you would recommend to our listeners and our viewers that would help explain sort of the Jewish roots of Christianity, the Jewish roots of Catholicism?
Yeah, some of the ones I mentioned. I mean, N.T. Wright's good. Well, he's not a Catholic, but between Christianity and Judaism, N.T. Wright certainly. E.P. Sanders, another one. But someone from within the Catholic sphere is Brant Petrie. So Brant's books about Eucharist, about the sacraments and so on, are very good, about Mary, about showing these Jewish roots of these Christian convictions. So get any of Brant Petrie's books.
Yeah. What about the other side of it? Are there any Jewish scholars that you might recommend?
I'd have to think, Jared. I'm not sure. I don't want to just jump. I mentioned Rabbi Sachs, who has written about some of these things. I'd have to think a little bit more about that.
Okay. Well, now it's time for our question from a listener. And this one comes from Don and Bethany Wilcox out of Phoenix, Arizona, who asks a little bit about that the split between East and West.
Oh, okay.
This is Don and Bethany from Phoenix, Arizona. We have a question about the division between East and West 1,000 years ago. We wondered if you could speak to why Orthodox and Catholic Christianity split, and why it is that today they're not able to get back together. Thanks, and God bless.
Thank you for that question. And you're right. We've been wrestling for 1,000 years. You know, my hero, St. Thomas Aquinas, and his friend St. Bonaventure died. Thomas on the way to it, Bonaventure at it, the Council of Lyon, 1274. The stated purpose of which was to find a rapprochement between East and West. So my point there is that the Christians have been trying for a long time to overcome the split. And the Pope at the time, in 1274, brought in his two heavyweights. He brought in the two smartest guys in the West, Bonaventure and Aquinas, partially to try to solve this problem. So Christians have been passionate for a long time. Think now of Paul VI in the wake of the council, meeting his counterpart from the East. Look at Francis. I mean, does it all the time. So you're right in seeing this as a really neuralgic point. John Paul, that wanted us to breathe with both lungs, right? Both East and West. Now, why the split 1054? There's, the library shelves of books written on it. Partially political, to be honest about it, political resentments and so on and so forth. Doctrinally, I'd say authority is a major issue, and that's as old as the hills in Christianity, is central authority versus more local authority. Who of the great patriarchal sees has primacy? What's the nature of that primacy? So the West gathering eventually around the Bishop of Rome as the key center of unity and source of authority. That's one issue, obviously, is the Pope. Theologically, there's a lot of differences East and West. Read someone like Gregory of Nyssa in the East, Augustine in the West, or Chrysostom in the East, Jerome in the West. Or you'll see these basic differences in approach. Some of that crystallized around these Christological and Trinitarian themes. The famous filioque problem. So we say that the Spirit proceeds ex patre filioque, from the Father and from the Son. And we still say it every Sunday in the Nicene Creed. The East balks at that. I won't go into the details, are too complex of how the two arguments shake out. But there's a difference there in the way we understand Trinitarian theology. There are huge points of contact, doctrinally and sacramentally and all that. So there's plenty of ground for real rapprochement. My hope is that what didn't happen in 1274 could happen. And people like Paul VI and John Paul II and Pope Francis sowing the seeds of it, I hope it could happen.
All right. Well, Bishop, I want to thank you for your excellent guidance in this conversation. And for all of our listeners and viewers, as the director of the Word on Fire Institute, I thought I'd just take a small second to talk about the Institute. And, if you really want to be formed in the way in which Bishop Barron is talking about evangelization and going out and bringing the gospel, the light of Christ to the world, join the Word on Fire Institute. Just go to wordonfire.institute. We've got tons of courses in there that range from philosophy, theology, practical evangelism, even literature. Lots of different things involved in that. We bring in a lot of experts to come and teach on their different areas of expertise. We've got a very lively student forum, as well as those fellows, our professors are getting involved in the conversations. And we also talk about a lot of, current happenings as a community and how that affects us as evangelists. And so, just to invite you into the Word on Fire Institute, again, visit wordonfire.institute and you can sign up today. And with that subscription, you also get a free subscription to Word on Fire Digital, which gives you access to all of Bishop Barron's study programs and topical programs and the great pivotal players and Catholicism series and all of those. So again, go to wordonfire.institute and you can sign up today. Well, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week at the Word on Fire show.
Hey everybody, it's Bishop Barron. Just finished another typically long day at the Synod. This morning we started in the Synod Hall with our small groups, and today was the presentation of my relatio, which is kind of my summary statement of what our group said. The group has to approve it, so they have to vote for it and say, yeah, that does speak what we have in mind. And then we did the modi, and modi are our amendments that we're proposing to the Instrumentum Laboris. So we went through that process, voting on each one. Then I had to bring them up to the headquarters in that building and present the relatio, the modi, and then with our electronic version, which I didn't have last time. But all that got submitted, and I found out I was going to be the 5th speaker tonight. So indeed, we come back this afternoon, and there were 14 speakers, all the relatores from the various groups speak. So I was fifth, and what struck me as funny was I get up there and I'm reading my report, and it's like suddenly old hat to have the Pope 4 people down the row from you and talking to the Synod Hall, but so it goes in this process. So I just listened to 14 talks in about 6 different languages, which is interesting, and it's also a bit of a workout. So this day's over, and now tomorrow we have more interventi. So this is now on part 3 of the Instrumentum Laboris. We just finished part 2. Now part 3, everyone's going to start giving their speeches. Then we break into small groups for the last time. So we're moving to the Synod. I saw the Pope today during the break. I said hello to him and thanked him for the opportunity to be here. And he just kind of looked at me. The poor man is probably so distracted by so many things. But it's an honor to be here. It's a thrill. So keep praying for all of us, and we'll pray for you. God bless you.